There's a rhythm to washing dishes in a busy restaurant. The heat from the machines, the clatter of ceramic against steel, the steam rising in thick clouds. It becomes a kind of background hum, almost meditative if you let it. But in Hales, there was no space for peace. Not for someone like me. The other staff avoided me when they weren't whispering about me. Some thought I was mute. Others thought I was a former inmate, or worse. No one really asked, and I never offered the truth. Hales was an upscale bistro, tucked into the heart of downtown Portland. It had earned itself a reputation. Organic ingredients, moody lighting, and a wine list longer than the menu. The kind of place where couples celebrated anniversaries, and executives came to impress clients. Every surface gleamed, from the polished bar to the gleaming kitchen tiles. And Richard Hale, the owner, made sure of it. Richard wasn't a cruel man, but he was tired, and tired men lose their softness. He used to be one of those charming, take command of the room types. But lately, the lines around his mouth had deepened. The crease between his brows seemed permanent. His marriage was fraying, his manager had just quit, and the business he'd built from the ground up was becoming more burden than pride. I saw it in the way he looked at his own reflection in the bar's mirror one night, like he didn't recognize the man staring back. He barely saw his wife anymore. Vanessa Hale was the kind of woman who wore perfume that lingered in a room long after she left it. Always manicured, always styled, always half a glass of Chardonnay away from starting a fight. She'd started accusing him of cheating, which was ironic, given how often she disappeared with friends from yoga. I only know this because she didn't care who overheard her yelling. Most nights, Richard left before sunrise and returned after Vanessa was already asleep, if she was even home at all. And then Mark Peterson, the restaurant manager who had kept things afloat, handed in his resignation. I heard it happened quietly, with a polite envelope placed carefully on Richard's desk. But I knew Richard saw it as a betrayal. He didn't like surprises. That same night he was on edge, snappish with everyone, pacing the floor with his phone buzzing endlessly in his pocket. Vanessa kept calling. He kept ignoring. Meanwhile, downstairs, I was scrubbing glassware when Ethan Cole, the bartender, held up a sparkling tumbler and called out, "Hey, Lauren, you missed a spot." The two waitresses nearby stifled their laughs. He held it up like a trophy, tilting it in the light to reveal what? A speck of dust? A smudge that wasn't there? I walked over, took the towel from the counter, and wiped the rim once. Calm, wordless. I handed it back. Ethan opened his mouth to say something else, but I was already gone. That wasn't the first time. He did it often. It became a performance, the way he'd pretend to inspect every glass I touched, like I was incompetent. The other staff played along, finding ways to make me the punchline of whatever slow shift joke they came up with that night. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. That infuriated them more than any outburst would have. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that upstairs, Richard had given Ethan a task. Get rid of her. That's what he said. Make her quit. Start something, provoke her, make a scene. He didn't care how. Just don't let her last another week. And so, the games had only just begun. The next few days followed the same pattern. Ethan trying, failing, and trying again. He'd hold a plate up and examine it like it was a crime scene. Sometimes he'd mutter just loud enough for the waitstaff to hear, "It's hard to find good help these days," then glance in my direction with a smirk. Others would chuckle. It didn't bother me. Not really. I'd seen worse. A man playing tough in front of an audience wasn't new. What irritated him most was that I never gave him what he wanted. No eye rolls, no biting comebacks, no protests. Just a quiet nod, a polite smile, and back to work. It chipped away at his confidence, and somewhere in there I think it started to confuse him. People talked. Of course they did. They always do. I wasn't social, and that made me a target. I kept my hair tucked under a faded cap, my eyes down, my apron clean. That only fueled the rumors. Some said I used to be a stripper or a drug mule. Others whispered that Richard had picked me up from the streets, out of pity, Gave me a job so I wouldn't starve. One of the servers swore I was his cousin's ex who had burned down a bar in Seattle. No one ever asked me directly. They just filled in the blanks with the worst possibilities. I didn't care. Let them think what they want. As long as I got my paycheck and no one touched me, they could invent entire screenplays. But Ethan's failure to rattle me started to become a problem for Richard. I heard later on that Richard had docked his tips one night, told him he was useless if he couldn't even shake a dishwasher. The next morning, Richard slammed the cash register closed so hard it startled a customer. That's when I knew something had shifted. When a man starts taking his frustrations out on metal, you learn to keep your distance. Then came the night everything changed. It was late. Most of the staff had already left. I was stacking the last few trays of silverware when I saw Ethan approach out of the corner of my eye. I expected another sarcastic comment or half insult disguised as a joke. Instead, he held out a brown paper bag like it weighed more than it should. "I figured you might want this," he said, sounding awkward. I took the bag and gave it a quick sniff. Vanilla, cocoa, a hint of cinnamon. Chocolate cake. Real chocolate, not the waxy store-bought kind. "They didn't sell much of it tonight," he added, scratching the back of his neck. "Pastry team was going to toss it, but I thought, well, it'd be a waste." I stared at him, not with suspicion, not with warmth. Just stared, long enough to make him shift uncomfortably. "You live far from here?" he asked. I should have stayed quiet. I should have taken the cake and walked away. But something in his voice, tentative, tired, maybe genuine, tugged at me. "Not really," I said finally. 15 minutes by foot." He hesitated. "Well, enjoy, I guess." I don't know why I said it, but the words came out before I could second-guess them. "You could come have a slice," I said, "if you're not in a rush." His eyes widened a little, like I'd spoken in a language he hadn't expected to understand. He blinked, then nodded. "Yeah, sure. Why not?" That night, Ethan Cole followed me home. He thought he was just going for cake, but that visit would mark the first crack in everything he thought he knew about me, and the beginning of a truth he wasn't ready for. My apartment sat on the 3rd floor of an aging brick building tucked behind a gas station and a shuttered laundromat. The stairs creaked with every step, and the hallway smelled faintly of bleach and damp carpet. The paint peeled near the baseboards, and the buzz of the hallway light never stopped. I saw Ethan glance around as we climbed, his eyes flicking over the warped door frames and the faded unit numbers. I said nothing. Inside, the place was small, just one room and a kitchenette, with a tiny bathroom in the corner and windows that rattled when the wind blew. But I kept it clean, always. There were yellow curtains hanging from the windows, not much, just cheap fabric clipped to a piece of string, but they caught the late light in a way that made the room feel warmer. On the windowsill, a chipped ceramic mug held a small bouquet of fake daisies. The sofa was secondhand, the coffee table scratched, but it was mine. Ethan stepped in and hesitated. He looked like he wasn't sure whether to take off his shoes, sit down, or bolt. That awkward half-smile stayed frozen on his face. I closed the door behind us and locked it. Then, without warning, I stepped close and shoved him against the wall. It wasn't hard, just firm enough to make a point. My elbow pressed gently against his throat, not choking, just there. He went rigid. "Still think I'm just a dishwasher?" I asked softly. His breath caught. I could feel the rhythm of it under my arm. His eyes were wide now, scanning my face, searching for something. I held him there for just a second longer before stepping back. "I don't like games," I said. "So if this is one, you should go." Ethan raised both hands, still a little stunned. "It's not. I swear. It's cake. I brought cake." I let the silence hang for a beat, then nodded toward the small table near the window. "Put it down. I'll make tea." He exhaled slowly and walked to the table. I heard the bag crinkle as he opened it, heard the shift in his posture as he started to settle in. I moved around the kitchen, quietly heating water, pulling out two mismatched mugs and a tin of black tea bags. I had no sugar, no milk, just leaves and steam. We sat at the table and shared the cake in silence for a few minutes. It was better than I expected. Moist, dark, not too sweet. Ethan seemed to relax a little, even smiled once. I didn't return it. Then I saw his gaze drift toward the fridge. A photo was pinned there with a flower-shaped magnet. He tilted his head. "That your daughter?" he asked. I didn't look. "Yes." "The man next to her?" I paused, the fork frozen, halfway to my mouth. "Someone I used to know." He looked at me again. "You don't seem like the mom type." I set my fork down carefully. "She's 5. Her name is Lily. She looks like you. Everyone says that." "Where is she now?" "At a night care center near the East Park. I pick her up after work. She stays there on my shifts." He nodded slowly, then looked down at his plate. The silence was different now. He wasn't playing anymore, and I wasn't hiding. I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. But in that tiny apartment with chipped mugs and yellow curtains, a line had been crossed. He'd seen a sliver of the truth, and from the way his expression changed, I could tell he wouldn't be able to forget it. I don't know why I told him. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the way he looked at Lily's picture. Not with judgment, but something softer. Or maybe I was just tired of carrying it all alone. Whatever the reason, I opened my mouth, and the past came spilling out like a dam had cracked. "I wasn't always like this," I said, staring at my tea. "I used to come from money. My parents were diplomats. Real ones. DC circles, international schools, weekend trips to Europe. I was the girl who wore ballet flats from Paris and spoke 3 languages before I could drive." Ethan didn't say anything, just listened. But I didn't want that life. I didn't care about policy or foreign service or the career path they'd laid out for me like a gilded sidewalk. I wanted to dance. I smiled just barely. There's something about dancing. When it's good, when it's real, it feels like flying underwater. Like you're defying every rule gravity ever made. "My parents hated it," I continued. "They thought I was being reckless, immature. When I got accepted into a contemporary dance conservatory instead of Georgetown, my father called me a disgrace. My mother cried for a week. They told me to pack my bags and get out if I insisted on ruining my life. So I did." Ethan's brow furrowed. I could tell he wasn't sure whether to admire me or pity me. "Best decision I ever made," I said. "Hard, but worth it." I found a crappy dorm room with a shared bathroom and 15 roommates, who all smelled like Tiger Balm and ambition. I waited tables at night and danced all day. And somewhere in that chaos I met Mitchell. His name still caught in my throat. He was in the year above me. Brilliant. Not just talented, visionary. When he moved, people stopped to breathe. We fell in love the way artists do. Fast, wild, dramatic. We got into a touring company right after graduation and spent 2 years on the road. Europe, Latin America, Asia. It was magic. Exhausting, but magic. Then came Morocco. There's a festival in Marrakesh. We were opening night. The company pulled every string to get us that spot. But someone cut corners. The stage stairs weren't reinforced. They collapsed under us during the entrance. Mitchell got the worst of it. Fractured his leg in 3 places. A shard of wood punctured his thigh muscle. The doctors said he might walk again, but dance? Never. I looked at Ethan. He hadn't touched his tea. We came home. Tried to start over. We opened a restaurant, small, Moroccan-inspired, just a few tables. We poured everything into it. Money, recipes, our hearts. And it worked. People loved it. We were planning to expand when Lily came along. I paused. She wasn't planned, but she was perfect. Ethan nodded slowly. I could tell he was starting to understand the shape of the storm I'd weathered. But we hadn't reached the worst part. We got an offer from a group of American importers. They had spice farms overseas and promised exclusive product lines. Better saffron, Rare peppers, new blends. We signed a deal. They even sent a chef to work with us. My voice dropped, but it was set up. The shipment got flagged to customs. Hidden inside the spice sacks were illegal narcotics, the kind that gets people 20 years behind bars. The chef disappeared. The importers vanished. Mitchell tried to fight it. He believed we could prove we were framed. I swallowed. He died of a heart attack 2 weeks later. Silence filled the room like a second presence. I could hear Ethan's breath, steady but shallow. I took Lily and ran. Portland was the first place I could afford rent and childcare on the same block. I changed my look, took what work I could, and here I am. Ethan looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not the dishwasher, not the punchline, just a woman who'd been through hell, and walked out still standing. Things at the restaurant started to shift again, and not in the quiet way you notice over time. This was sharp, sudden, messy. The kind of tension you feel in the walls before a storm. I didn't witness the explosion firsthand, but word spreads fast in a place like Hales. One of the servers who lived nearby told me Vanessa had waited up for Richard that night, made sure of it. When he walked through the front door, after midnight, she let him have it. Dishes flew, a lamp shattered, and the shouting carried through the neighborhood until someone threatened to call the cops. The next morning, Richard arrived at the restaurant looking like he hadn't slept. He moved through the dining room like a ghost, jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack a molar. Then there was the smell. The cologne Richard wore was subtle, clean, citrusy, almost forgettable. But that morning, the air around him carried something else, something floral and heavy. Jasmine and lilies, the kind of perfume you can't escape once it's on your skin. It was familiar, too familiar. Later, I realized it was the same scent Vanessa wore when she wanted to leave an impression, the kind of scent that lingered on pillows or strangers. Richard had noticed it too. I saw it in the way he stiffened when he reached for his jacket, only to pause and sniff the collar. Something broke in him then, the kind of crack that doesn't make noise but changes a man. The very next day, Vanessa arrived at the restaurant around noon, bright-eyed, overdressed, and oozing charm. She didn't usually visit during lunch rush, let alone step into the kitchen. But this time, she had someone with her. Adrian Scott. He was tall, lean, with that slippery kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He wore a fitted black chef's coat and carried a leather-bound knife roll under his arm. Vanessa introduced him as a friend of a friend with international culinary experience. She insisted he would be perfect for their next menu launch. Richard didn't argue. He barely looked at the man, just nodded and walked away. But I noticed the way Adrian glanced around the kitchen, like he was casing the place, like he wasn't looking at stoves or spices, but exits and blind spots. Something about him put me on edge. Later that day, I overheard Vanessa talking to Richard in his office. Her voice was sugary but firm. "You owe me," she said. "After last night, you could at least give me this." I said, "I'm not in the mood," Richard growled. "Oh, come on," she purred. "It'll be fun. Just a silly little act to lighten the mood. What harm could it do?" I didn't know what they were planning, but my gut already didn't like it. The plan, as I found out an hour later, was absurd. Vanessa had convinced Richard to play a prank on their new business partners, the spice importers he'd been trying to sign for weeks. Her idea? To pretend that I was his wife, me, the dishwasher, to bring me into the meeting in my work clothes and introduce me as Mrs. Hale. She wanted to watch their reactions, let them squirm, then swoop in with her designer heels and flawless smile for the big reveal. She called it a joke. Richard called it a distraction. I called it something else entirely. Richard found me in the kitchen about 10 minutes before the meeting. He didn't bother with small talk. "I need you to come upstairs," he said flatly. "You're going to play my wife for about 5 minutes. Just stand there and smile. Then Vanessa will show up and the joke ends." That's it. I didn't answer right away. I peeled off my gloves and wiped my hands slowly on a towel. He was already turning to leave. "Richard," I said calmly. "Why me?" He stopped. His shoulders tensed. "Because she asked for it." That wasn't an answer. Not really. But I followed him anyway. The conference room was small, sterile, and far too cold. Two men were already seated at the table. Vitaly Morgan and his associate Lucas Tran. They looked the part of legitimate businessmen. Crisp suits, polished shoes, firm handshakes. But their eyes told a different story. There was calculation in them, the kind that measures risks, not people. Richard introduced me with a forced smile. "This is my wife, Lauren. She helps out around the restaurant sometimes. Doesn't mind getting her hands dirty." The two men stood and nodded politely. They didn't ask questions, but I saw the flicker of surprise. I was still wearing my apron and hairnet. The smell of dish soap clung to my skin. "We appreciate you taking time today," Vitaly said. "We're very eager to finalize this partnership." Lucas handed Richard a folder. "Standard contract. You'll find the terms favorable." I didn't wait for Richard to open it. I stepped forward, lifted the folder from the table, and began to read. No one stopped me. The pages were filled with legal jargon, percentages, clauses, distribution rights, but buried in the fine print were logistics terms I recognized. Codes for ports I'd seen before. References to containers labeled as herbal commodity blends that bypassed typical inspections. My blood turned cold. It was the same language used in the contract that destroyed my life. The same structure, the same loopholes, and the same trap. I looked up, slow and steady. "Richard," I said softly, "don't sign this." His head jerked toward me. "What are you talking about?" I turned the contract around and tapped a paragraph near the bottom. "These men don't sell spices. Not the kind that belong in a kitchen, anyway. They use cover shipments to smuggle narcotics. And this document gives them full clearance to move through your supply chain without oversight." Lucas's jaw tightened. Vitaly's hands froze mid-fold. Richard stared at them, then back at me. "Are you insane?" Lucas hissed. "No," I said. "Just experienced." That's when Vanessa burst in, all dramatic timing and smug energy. "Surprise!" she chirped, stepping into the room. "She's not my husband's real wife. I am. Isn't that hilarious?" The room fell silent. No one laughed. Vanessa's smile faltered. Then Richard spoke, his voice like ice. "You brought them to me." "What?" She blinked. "No, Adrian said." "Adrian?" Richard echoed. "The new chef? The one who smells like your perfume." Vitaly stood abruptly, but Richard raised a hand. "Don't move." He looked at me. "Call the police." I didn't hesitate. Within the hour, the office was filled with uniforms. Vanessa was in handcuffs, screaming that it was all a misunderstanding. Lucas tried to slip out the back and was tackled before he reached the stairs. Adrian, it turned out, had a record under another name and had already been flagged by Homeland Security. Richard stood in the middle of the chaos, surrounded by the wreckage of his trust. And I stood beside him, watching the empire of lies come crashing down. The restaurant was quieter than I'd ever seen it. Even the machines in the kitchen seemed to hum at half volume. After the arrests, the news spread fast, first through the staff, then through whispers from suppliers and clients. Richard canceled reservations for the week and locked the doors. Vanessa was gone. Adrian, too. The so-called importers were in federal custody, and the DEA had started combing through every box, every shipment, every invoice connected to Hales. No one looked at me like a dishwasher anymore. In fact, most of them didn't know what to call me at all. I kept to myself, as usual, but this time I wasn't hiding. There was nothing left to fear. My secrets were out, but they hadn't sunk me. Not this time. Richard found me 2 days later, sitting at one of the empty tables in the closed dining room, peeling the label off a bottle of mineral water. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down across from me and studied my face like he was seeing it for the first time. "I owe you everything," he said. I didn't respond. "I mean it," he continued. "You saved my business, my name. Hell, probably kept me out of prison." He pulled something from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. A key. I stared at it. "That's for an apartment across town," he said. "A better one. 2 bedrooms. Safe neighborhood. Near a school. It's already paid for the year." I opened my mouth to speak, but he wasn't done. "I also spoke to my attorney this morning. I'm transferring a 15% share of the business to you, and I want you to run this place." That made me freeze. "What?" I said. "You've seen how this place works. Every crack in the wall, every lazy staff member, every mistake I've made. And you never once used it against me. That's more than I can say for most people in my life." He leaned back, looking suddenly older but lighter. "I need someone I can trust. And I trust you." I was quiet for a long time. Then I said, "You tried to force me out." He nodded. "I did, because I was stupid and scared, and because I listened to people who never really saw you." I picked up the key, turned it over in my hand. It felt solid, real. "Don't expect a smile and a speech," I said. He let out a breath. "I won't. Just say yes." I nodded once. Later that night, Ethan found me in the pantry, restocking flour. He looked sheepish. "So that happened," he said. "Yeah," I replied, pouring the last of the sugar into a container. "I just wanted you to know," he went on. "They tried to pull me into it. Vanessa and Adrian told me if I helped set you up, there'd be a bonus in it. A big one." I turned to face him, and I asked. "I walked out," he said. Didn't say a word. Just left. I studied him for a moment. "That's probably the smartest thing you've ever done." He gave a crooked smile. "Yeah, well, I had a good reason." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. In his eyes, for the first time, there was no condescension, just quiet respect. I found them in the dining room after closing. Richard sitting at one of the corner tables, a glass of untouched whiskey in front of him, and Ethan standing nearby with his arms crossed, like he wasn't sure whether to sit or leave. The room was dim except for the low glow of the overhead sconces. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices weren't exactly quiet, and something in the air told me not to walk away just yet. "You did the right thing," Richard was saying. "Walking away from Vanessa, from that mess. You had every reason to sell me out, but you didn't." Ethan shifted, uneasy. "Didn't feel right." "That's what I mean," Richard replied. "You've got something most people don't. A line you won't cross. I recognize that because I lost mine for a while." There was a silence between them, heavy and strange. Then Richard did something I didn't expect. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. He slid it across the table toward Ethan. "That's your mother," he said. Ethan didn't move at first. Then he leaned in slowly, lifting the photo. His expression changed in real time, confusion, disbelief, something like awe. Richard cleared his throat. "Her name was Julia. She worked at a culinary school I taught at briefly years ago. We were young. Stupid. I left when I got a better offer out of state. She never told me she was pregnant." I could see Ethan's shoulders tense. He didn't say anything, just stared at the photo. "I didn't know you existed until a few months ago," Richard went on. "When you applied to work here, your name didn't register. But your face, your eyes, they stopped me in my tracks. You look just like her." Ethan finally spoke. "So you checked up on me?" Richard nodded. "Hired a private investigator. I didn't know how else to be sure. And when it came back, when I saw the birth records, I realized what I'd missed." Another silence followed. This one longer, deeper. I stayed in the doorway, watching, not wanting to interrupt the kind of moment that happens once in a lifetime. Ethan finally sat down, slowly, like his legs had lost their strength. I grew up thinking I didn't have a dad, or that maybe he didn't want me. I didn't know, Richard said quietly, but that's not an excuse. I left someone I loved, and I missed the chance to raise the one thing that ever would have made me proud. Their eyes met across the table. Neither man moved for a long time. I don't know how to do this, Ethan said. Me either, Richard admitted, but maybe we can figure it out. One step at a time. From where I stood, I felt something shift. Like the air had cleared, like two lost pieces of something had finally clicked into place. Later that night, Ethan found me locking up the back. He didn't say anything, just stood next to me, watching the parking lot disappear into fog. "So," I said softly, "you've got a dad now." He nodded, eyes ahead. "Yeah, I guess I do." "You okay?" "I don't know," he said, "but I think I might be." I didn't press further. Some truths don't need discussion. They just need time to settle. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where the sky forgets to be anything but blue and the breeze carries that crisp promise of change. I stood by the window of our small home on the edge of town, watching Lily chase butterflies across the backyard in her rain boots, even though it hadn't rained in days. She laughed so loud it echoed off the fence and into the trees. That sound alone made everything I'd been through worth it. A full year had passed since the night everything collapsed and rebuilt itself. Richard had married Julia, yes, that Julia, just 3 weeks ago in a quiet ceremony out in Asheville where they'd first met. I wasn't invited to the wedding, but I saw the pictures. Julia wore a sky blue dress, and Richard looked lighter than I'd ever seen him, like something in him had finally been set right. Ethan walked him down the aisle. I think that meant more to Richard than the wedding itself. As for me, I was still at the restaurant, but everything was different now. I managed the floor, ran the books, trained the staff. People looked at me differently, not with suspicion or contempt, but with respect. Some even came to me for advice. I'd stopped hiding behind the wig long ago. My real hair had grown out, curling softly past my shoulders. My face looked different too, less shadow, more light. I didn't wear armor anymore. I didn't need it. One afternoon, just as we were closing up for the day, Ethan leaned against the bar with that half smile of his and asked, "You ever think about starting over?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean beyond everything we've already started over?" He shrugged, but there was something serious behind the grin. "I mean you and me, not as co-workers or housemates, something more." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I had known it for a while. "I thought you'd never ask," I said. He didn't kiss me then. Not yet. He just smiled wider and nodded, like something had been settled inside him. That night, after I tucked Lily into bed and turned off the last lamp, I sat out on the porch with a blanket over my knees and a mug of chamomile tea in my hands. The stars blinked above like quiet reminders. I'd lost so much, but I had also built something new, something no one could take from me. The past still lived in my bones. The betrayal, the running, the pain. But so did the strength, the will to survive, the grace to forgive, not for their sake, but for mine. Lily called me mommy in her sleep sometimes. That word, once so heavy, now felt like light, like music. Ethan moved in slowly over weeks. A book left on the coffee table, his shoes by the door, a second toothbrush. No rush, no pressure, just life, unfolding one small kindness at a time. And me? I was no longer the woman who scrubbed dishes in silence, who hid in corners, who flinched at raised voices. I had found my voice again, my name, my place. Some scars never fade, but they don't have to. They remind us we survived. So when people ask me how I did it, how I walked through fire and came out whole, I tell them the truth. I didn't come out whole. I came out stronger, and that's better